welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Monday, April 10th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined in our studio today by Charity Clark, who is the State Attorney General for Vermont. She was elected to that post last November. Some of you may remember a conversation we had last summer when you were running in the Democratic Party's primary for that post. Obviously, that story had a happy ending, and you went on to win the Attorney General post in the general election. And great to welcome you back.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be back. It's great to be home in Bennington County, of course.
That's right. Yes, Attorney General Clark is, of course, one of our neighbors down here in southern Vermont. She was a graduate of Burr and Burton Seminary. I want to be careful to note. Before it became an academy, and then went on to the University of Vermont and Boston College School of Law, and served as Assistant Attorney General for seven years, including 4 years as the Chief of Staff. So, Ms. Clark, great to have you back. Thank you very much for making the time for this conversation on what I'm sure is a busy day down here, being back in the old neighborhood. I just wanted to ask you, just to kind of get us started here, in the 3 months or so that you've been serving as the Attorney General of the state, what have been some of the big issues that your office has had to grapple with, or that have come up on the radar screen up in Montpelier?
Well, it's been another thrilling beginning of the legislative session. The legislature also came back in January. I returned to the office and they came back too, so a lot of our work has been focused on that and also responding to events on the national level as well. But yeah, we have several bills that we have been trying to get through the legislature. It's been really fun to work on those with so many new legislators, many of whom I was lucky enough to meet last year when I was campaigning. Some down here, some fellow kids from Northshire, as I like to call them. So it's been really really wonderful. I should pause and say a little bit about the Attorney General's office. I don't think people realize that we actually, of all the statewide elected officials, the Attorney General has the biggest staff. We have 150 people working in the office. Almost 100 of those folks are lawyers, and we are kind of all over the map in terms of background, and whether it's an environmental attorney, a civil attorney, a criminal attorney, or just transactional attorneys, reading contracts, not necessarily going to court. So we have a huge staff, and of course that means that we do a lot of work supporting the legislature in their work. They have their own lawyers, legislative counsel, but we are also there providing our subject matter expertise and that kind of thing. And really, the Attorney General provides leadership on many issues. So it's been gratifying to be next door in the State House, and that's what we spent a lot of time on so far.
Well, let's drill down into some of the bills that, at least from my perspective down south, seem to have bubbled up under the Golden Dome for a conversation. And one of the ones that struck me is this bill H230.
Yep.
It's a gun safety and safe storage bill.
Yes. I
wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that. What is that bill designed to do, and do you think it's going in the right direction?
I do. I've supported that bill. I've testified on that bill. I think last week I testified on that bill. That is the suicide prevention bill. So it is a combination of gun safety measures that are designed to prevent suicide. We know that in this state, I think 88 or 90% of gun deaths are suicides. There is a very wonderful, smart legislator called Representative Alyssa Black, and her son died by suicide after having purchased a firearm a few hours later. And she was the one who made the report in the House, on the floor of the House, when the bill was passing the House. And her speech, which I encourage you to Google, it was so persuasive. She talks a lot about some of the statistics around suicide, and really there is no correlation between suicidal ideation and completing the act of suicide. It's something that you can't really predict, except for the how, as she put it, the firearm. It's the lethality when a firearm is used is much, much higher. And so if we can interrupt that through a 72-hour waiting period, through safe storage, we're going to be saving lives. So it was, I was proud to support that bill and feel very strongly it should be passed. And hopefully, in a matter of a couple of months, it will be law.
So do you think it's got a good chance of getting
I do.
through and the governor signing it?
I haven't spoken to the governor. I will say that it came out of the House with an almost veto-proof vote. I think that the Senate seems to be very supportive of that bill, and I noticed even when I testified, a lot of the kinks of the bill had been worked out on the House side, and so I think that the Senate side is having a smoother ride even than it did in the House, and hopefully the governor will sign that bill, and if he doesn't, hopefully the legislature will override the veto.
Because it also seems to me that there is also a correlation between that bill and what it's attempting to do and domestic violence, which I know has been another issue that you've been focused on.
Yes.
I mean, are a lot of events in the domestic violence arena stem from people being able to acquire firearms when maybe they shouldn't have them?
Yes, there's a huge correlation there. For one thing, we know that half of homicides annually relate to domestic violence, whether it is the survivor of the domestic violence or even someone who comes to that person's aid, like a law enforcement officer or a family member. Half of homicides are related to domestic violence. And again, when a firearm is used, the lethality is much higher, it's much riskier. One of the things that one of the first things I did as Attorney General was to advocate for the recommendations made by basically a task force called the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission, which is a commission of 17 stakeholders created in statute over 20 years ago to review fatalities that relate to domestic violence every year and identify trends and then come up with recommendations to everybody, but especially the governor and the legislature. And this year, I had a press conference and had legislative leadership with me to amplify those recommendations. I was so grateful that legislative leaders took up those issues, incorporated them into bills. They are well on their way to becoming law. And, I should say here, the stakeholder process is very effective. It works really well when we get all the voices in the room. And I think that is just so important. I'm really proud of the work of that commission. And I can't wait for those bills to become law.
Are you seeing any positive trend around this? I mean, domestic violence has been a problem here in the state as it has been across the country, I imagine.
Yeah.
For a long time. I mean, this is not a new issue. Are we making any progress or headway on that?
I would say a couple of things about that. We, in our lifetimes, we can see the progress that we've made because people are talking about it. I mean, it used to be something that wasn't even talked about, and there are parts of this country where it was still legal to rape your wife until the 70s or something. So, of course, I think it's really wonderful that we're talking about this, because how would we ever find the solutions if we're not even talking about it? The other thing I would say is there's actually several bills, not just in response to the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission, but other bills related to domestic violence making their way through the legislature this year. One of them relates to when domestic violence is diverted and used, and restorative justice is used rather than the traditional court system. We had a pilot at a White River Junction taking place at a restorative justice center there, where victims were invited and the perpetrator was invited to participate in restorative circles. And what we know is that in many cases, the abuser and the survivor are still living together and still together. So if we can reach out and try to use those restorative justice practices with the abuser to try to help them, we hopefully will get better results. We know that the restorative justice programs have been very successful with other crimes in other areas, and I'm hopeful that that bill also passes, because right now it's not a mechanism that's able to be used in the criminal justice system officially. But after that pilot that went well, the suggestion was put forward, and the bill is making its way through the legislature. So.
All right, well,
Yeah.
we'll certainly watch its progress then.
Yeah.
I wanted to pivot to something that is both an older problem and something that's got a very recent twist to it. and that's the question around abortion. I know you've been a strong advocate for the abortion shield law, but I wanted to get your reaction to that decision that came out of Texas last Friday, just before the weekend, where a federal judge there released a ruling that would restrict the use of mifepristone. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And while that decision was stayed for a week, it's not in effect yet. In theory, as I understand it, and I'm sure you're well more versed in the intricacies of this than I am, it potentially could have a nationwide impact if the U.S. Supreme Court eventually decided to support the judge's ruling. I understand that there are several states that have signed on to another decision that originated out of the state of Washington that would directly counter that decision. Is Vermont going to be one of them?
Yes. So yeah, you were right. There's two decisions to pay attention to. First was the Texas decision that ordered the FDA to essentially pull mifepristone from the market. And then an hour later, a Washington court ordered the FDA to keep the status quo, so basically the exact opposite. Vermont is a plaintiff in that Washington case. There are 12 states that joined. I made sure that Vermont was one of those cases. So we are a party to that case in which a judge instructed the FDA keep the status quo. What we're seeing happen, of course, is both of those decisions being appealed, and we will continue to be a plaintiff in the Washington case. With the Texas case, states aren't a party, but we can file what's called an amicus brief or friend of the court brief that lays out Vermont's interest in the outcome. Of course, overwhelmingly, Vermonters voted to amend our Constitution in November to make sure that reproductive liberty was included. We have a constitutional right in Vermont to an abortion pursuant to our state constitution. So we know that this is a value that Vermonters have. It's something that I believe very strongly in, especially as the first woman elected Attorney General of Vermont, and will do everything in my power to try to preserve our right and protect the value that we have here of bodily autonomy and reproductive freedom.
Well, I was wondering, because since we did pass that constitutional amendment last November, I mean, why would that ruling in Texas have any impact here?
Well, we live in a federalism is the system of our government, and the Texas court ordered the FDA to do something. I mean, luckily we had the Washington court ordering the exact opposite thing. Now we're in the appeals process. But something, Andrew, I want to make sure I mention is that mifepristone has been on the market for over 20 years. So we've seen that it's safe and effective because it's been used for over 20 years. So I don't take kindly to one judge in Texas trying to, subject the rest of us to his personal viewpoint. We know it's safe, we know it's effective, and I'm hopeful that we will see a smooth next path. But we certainly will be there fighting as long as we have to.
Mm-hmm. Well, it'd certainly be interesting to see if that does make it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And given the current makeup of that court, it'll be fascinating to see how they all. I read an interesting article about it this morning where that suggested that Brett Kavanaugh, of all people, could be the crucial swing vote.
That's interesting. The truth is, though, that when we're focused on the abortion element, but this could have much bigger implications when it comes to any kinds of drugs that you can imagine that the FDA oversees. And we are focused on the abortion piece, but this could have much bigger implications as well. I'm sure there's people who probably don't care as much about the issue of abortion, but maybe they have another issue that involves another drug, and they're concerned and they're worried. So it is very interesting to see how things are shaking out in this strange new world we find ourselves in post-Roe.
Indeed, because I thought the idea behind the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe was that, well, states can do whatever they want. Well, I guess not.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. Well, your office is involved in a lot of different areas, and one of them I was fascinated to learn about was that apparently complaints about scams, phone scams or other kinds of scams, is a big topic that your office has to deal with. I guess I've always, why is it so hard to stop these people from making phone calls that trip people up or confuse them or whatever? And why can't they be shut down?
Yeah. It's funny, we talk about all these interesting issues, Andrew, but actually the most common way that Vermonters interface with the Attorney General's office is through our consumer assistance program, either making a consumer complaint or a scam report. That is the most common. Thousands every year of Vermonters get in touch with the consumer assistance program. As to scams, we know that most scams, overwhelming majority of scams, occur overseas. So it's very, very hard, especially for us in Vermont, to shut them down. So education is key, which is why you always hear me talking about scams so much, because I know when I'm talking about it, I'm helping people understand the risk and be on the lookout for the risks. One of the things that we have done in our office, however, is we were able to use technology to identify scam robocalls that are coming into this country and identify the telephone company that facilitated that scam robocall from coming into the country and then Vermont. And in doing so, we could say to that telephone carrier, no, you need to stop doing what you're doing. And we had started that a year and a half, 2 years ago with our robocall team. I've been really proud of the work that they've done, and we'll continue to do that to try to move the needle on reducing scams coming into Vermont. I'm proud to say we have made progress. I think some of that was work on the national level with scam calls, but of course, the way scammers work is they will continue doing what's effective. So they're going to continue scamming us through the phone until the phone doesn't work, and then it's going to be text or email or some other means. So we always have to be on the lookout for the evolving scams, which is one of the reasons why we always try to put out the top 10 scams of the year so that we can point out to folks, hey, here are the common scams, be on the lookout. One thing that we always see is imposter scams, where someone is trying to pretend to be someone you trust, like a family member, law enforcement, a pastor, and then they're going to try to trick you into giving them money for something.
So why, when these phone companies you were talking about, are they like, the basic major corporation phone companies that we're all familiar with, or are they minor actors that nobody's ever heard of?
They're incredibly small minor actors no one's ever heard of. And in some cases we've seen it's like 3 employees, they're very, very small. And we don't have any in Vermont that I'm aware of. They're in other states, but they're very, very small. And in a way, it makes it easy to deal with them because there's not many characters in the cast of characters. There's just the owner and the employees, and be able to show them the evidence of, look at all these scam robocalls that you're facilitating, and we're being hurt because Vermonters lose millions of dollars. And that's just the amount we know about. I think it's like $4 million something dollars that are reported to our office. Imagine how many people are embarrassed and they're not reporting to our office that they've been scammed and that they lost money. So,
what's the best advice you could give to somebody who gets a phone call they think is a scam? Just to hang up, or?
Yes, if they know it's a scam, hang up. Don't engage. Don't pick up the phone. Frankly, if it's an unfamiliar number, or if it looks like it might be suspicious. Sometimes I get scam calls from like Canaan, Vermont, and I think, I don't know that many people in Canaan, Vermont. I don't think I know anyone in Canaan, Vermont. Like, who's calling me? It probably maybe is a scam. But my biggest tip for scams is there's this like magical combination of reasons why this is a scam. So if you get a call, let's say a call, text, email, whatever, and it's urgent, it's spiking your emotional response, like making you feel excited or scared or worried, and you've never heard of this person, that urgency with the emotion and the unknown, red flag right away, it's probably a scam.
All right, good advice. Yeah, because I get calls from Canaan, Vermont too.
Yes.
I definitely don't know anybody up there.
Maybe they're inviting us to a potluck and we should go. I wish. No, it's a scam.
I also noticed that the right to repair bill is another one that your office is interested in. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that. That would allow me to fix my my iPad by getting a certain part instead of having to run to the Apple store? Or
well,
like
this is focused on farm equipment in particular because, well, for a number of reasons. But of course, you can imagine if I'm haying today and I need all my equipment to work properly and that it's going to rain tomorrow, I don't have time to go to the authorized dealer in Albany or wherever they're located and have them fix it. I don't have time to send my equipment away in the mail and have them fix it. I need it fixed right now. I need to be able to do it myself. And as I was just telling someone about, we have an ironing board in our house that was clearly made by, one of my farmer ancestors, because it's ingenious. It's all wood. There's like no metal in it. I'm like, this is an amazing piece of equipment that I'm sure some ingenious farmer made, 100 years ago. But we need to be able, farmers need to be able to fix their own equipment. So this would require them to get the information that they needed, the manuals that they need to have access to that so they can fix their own equipment. We testified on that bill, an important consumer bill, and that one again is making good progress. So looking forward to hopefully seeing that across the finish line at the end of the session.
Yeah, because it would seem like, why not,
Yeah.
Of course we should be able to do that sort of thing, but increasingly, and I suppose it's a profit-driving motive. A lot of these companies make stuff that the only way you can keep it going is to send it back and have them send you the part or whatever.
That's right.
Not like the good old days. The other thing I was interested in noticing was, there's, what was it, in 2020, I think, the state legislature passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, which mandated that the state achieve certain goals on greenhouse gas emissions. And I think the first one kicks in 2030, only 7 years from now. I think a certain healthy percentage of reduction of greenhouse gases compared to the 1990 level. And one of the provisions in that was that if the state didn't achieve that goal, and I think there were 3 goals altogether up to 2050, individuals in the state could sue the state, which always puzzled me as to exactly how either one individual would go about doing that, or is this more likely to be a case where some organization might have the standing, whatever, to launch a successful lawsuit. But I just wondered, would it be the role of your department to defend the state in that case?
Yes. So one of the roles that the Attorney General does is to defend the state when the state is sued. And we do that all the time in our civil division. So if sometimes it's an employment dispute or a contractual dispute or a public records dispute, whatever the case may be, this case, or this law is unconstitutional, we defend those as well. And in this case, we would defend the state if the state were sued as a result of the Global Warming Solutions Act. But we have time between now and then to make progress on implementing policies, passing laws, if necessary, to meet those goals. That's why they were set the way they were, to encourage the legislature and the administration and all of us really to work together to try to meet them. Right now, the Clean Heat Standard bill is pending in the House. I testified on that bill, my office testified on that bill, and that was identified by the Climate Council, which was created in the Global Warming Solutions Act to devise suggestions for how to meet the targets of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And they'd identify the Clean Heat Standard as one of the promising ways that we can meet that those targets. So I'm hopeful that that will also make progress this session. We know with global warming, the sooner we can implement these things, the better. So it's important that we keep our eye on the ball and keep working on that piece of legislation and any others that have been identified as promising ways that we can meet the targets.
Yeah, because like I said, all of a sudden 2030 doesn't seem that far away. We're used to looking at these dates in the calendar that seem like sometime in the next century.
Yeah, science fiction.
Here we are.
Yeah.
I guess just before we have to run here, just a quick question. What's been your biggest surprise since becoming Attorney General? I mean, you've been in the office for a long time and you came in pretty well equipped to take over the top job, but something surprised you that you didn't expect when you actually were number one.
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to say something funny, which is I was very surprised that my choice of attire at the inauguration made a big splash because I wore a white suit in honor of the suffragettes, as women first often do. And it seemed like 2 months later, I was running into people or even members of the media would say, like, I just want to say, Charity, I really loved your white suit. So that was my funny big surprise.
Well, all right. Well, I'm sure there'll be more to come probably in the next few years, whatever. But thank you again for making the time for this conversation. Really a pleasure. And well, we'll have to have you back again next time you're downtown.
Awesome.
In Manchester or wherever.
I'd love to come back. Thanks, Andrew.
All right. And thanks to all of you who have been with us. Hope you found our program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day.